Okay, so depending on what semester you're watching this in, the As You Learn page may look a little different. So this is being recorded in spring 2023, and it's just going to go over a little bit about how to approach this assignment regarding PV schematics. And so we'll use some of the CAD skills and commands that we've already gone over, and then we'll also introduce a few new ones. So to get to the assignment, I'm just going to click right here on this PV schematics and blocks link. And there are 3 files in here. This PDF file is just going to be our instructions, and then also a template file and a picture that is going to get inserted into that template file. So I'm just going to download the instructions first. So we'll look at that and open them up. So we're going to use AutoCAD to complete a photovoltaic schematic drawing using the template file and then the information that is in this video, as well as in class. We'll do it together. To submit your work, we're going to print it. We're going to virtually print it as a PDF. So we're not actually going to physically print it on a piece of paper, but I just want to introduce you to some of the printing functions. What we are going to do in this assignment is we are going to create some blocks of the panels as well as the batteries. And then we're going to use the various layers in our layer properties to fill in some of the missing areas within the image. So things like our wiring, schematics, as well as some of the other different components that might be in there. We'll place those blocks and we'll trace over the image, primarily using the polyline tool. And when we get there, I'll explain why the polyline tool is going to work better in this case. Then we're also going to learn about the text tool in order to label the charge controller, the AC/DC inverter, and the fuse box in there. And then we're going to freeze or turn off our background image. And then we'll go over how to print something out virtually. So if I go back to the assignment page on As You Learn, I'm going to download the template file. And then I also need to make sure I download this image. I don't need to open the image up. It's just when we open the template, it's going to look for this image in our download folder. And if we don't have the picture, it's not going to show up. So I'm just going to click right here on the AutoCAD template file, which is going to launch a brand new drawing. You can see here for me it's drawing 3 just because I've opened a couple of things up. And then I have this image here. If you didn't download the picture, this image is not going to show up. I cannot guarantee that that's the same thing on a Mac because I do not have a Mac, so I can't test that theory out. So if you are on a Mac, you may want to do this assignment through UDesk. So we have this picture schematic that we are just going to use to kind of follow along to place our different components on here, as well as then draw in some of our wiring. We don't need to be as precise with measurements like we are when we're making a set of construction documents, because this schematic is more just to understand how connections are being made and how the wiring is going together. It's not a layout of how this is exactly going to look in the end result. It's just kind of where the negatives and positive wires are going to be going. We also have some pieces over here to the side that we need to create into blocks. So these were made using polylines as well as rectangles, the array tool, and then of course hatch as well. So if I click right here, it just opens up the hatch menu saying that this is a hatch in this light gray color. And I kind of have all of these different just parts and pieces to represent the battery here, but all of these still are just separate. What a block is going to do is it's going to kind of join or group all of these different pieces together, so that way I can just easily insert it into this drawing here or even other drawings into the future once I have that block made. Later on in the course, within our interior elevation assignment, we'll even go over how you can find blocks online and download those and put them into your drawings. But for now, we're just going to create blocks based off the ones we have. So the first step of creating a block is just to highlight everything within it. So we'll make a block of this battery first. So I'm just going to highlight everything in the battery. I could do that through a window or a cross selection. And I have 13 pieces selected. I can see here in my properties bar that I have 13, which, by the way, if you don't have your properties bar, I'll just hit escape to get rid of that stuff. If you don't have your properties bar, you can just type in the word prop, and then it'll open up. It may be floating around here, but you can just drag the side of it. I like to just lock it into place on the side. And so again, to make a block of this, I'm just going to highlight everything. And then to create a block, I'm going to use this button up here in my block toolbar. And I'll say I want to make a new block. The first thing it's doing is, or the first thing it's asking is for a name. It's always a good idea to name things. Pretty obvious of what they are, so they're easier to find later on. We've already done this middle part here where it's asking us to select the objects, because I can see here I have 13 objects selected. And then an optional part that I like to do is this base point. So I'm going to click on pick point, and I'm just going to grab somewhere on it. It doesn't really matter in this case. So I'll just click some point as my base. And then in this description box, this is where I could maybe write things about like the voltage or like the charge time on this battery, even though that would, I guess, depend on the PV panels. But I can kind of put maybe different specifics about it. I'll just leave everything blank. I'm just going to click OK. Doesn't seem like anything really has been done. We can see now this is no longer just like a hatch pattern and a bunch of lines. This is a block reference. If I hover over it, it says it's a block. And then over here, it also says that it's a block. So now this is all just kind of one grouped piece that I can move or copy along. I can also insert it into the drawing through this insert tab here, where there's now this option for a battery that I can plop in. And this is where I can go take it and put it into other drawings if I needed it in another set of drawings. So I'll do the same thing here for my PV panel. I'll just hit escape to get rid of anything I might have had selected. So again, I'm just going to highlight the entire piece, everything in it. So I've got 37 different pieces selected at the moment. And then if I wanted to use the keyboard shortcut to create a block, instead of clicking on the button here, that is just the command block. And so this is going to open up the exact same thing. We see here my little preview of what I have selected. I'm going to name it photovoltaic panel. I already have my 37 objects selected. But if I wanted to maybe change what I had selected, I can just click on this and then I can just highlight everything, enter. Or if maybe I started the command without selecting anything, I still then have the option to go select it. For the base point, I'm just going to say I want to pick a point, and again, it can be anywhere on it. I'll just click on that corner. Seems like as good as any. And then I could put a description in here again about this specific panel if I needed to, but I'll just click OK. And now this is all one grouped or one joined piece if I click on it. And if I hit escape and I come up here to the insert, if I click on that little arrow, I can see here now that I can insert a PV panel. So our next step is we are going to create this schematic or just recreate the schematic that we have here. One thing I like to do whenever I have a background image that I'm using as a reference is I like to kind of fade the picture out. This is an optional step, but if I just click on the edge of it, in my toolbar up here, I have the options for this image, and you can drag this fade bar up to just kind of fade the image out a little bit, or you can even type in a specific number here. So I can say I want 75% transparency. I just like fading it because it makes it easier for me to see the lines that I intend to keep versus the lines I'm getting rid of. But again, that is going to be optional. And then once you're, if you choose to do that, once you're done, you can just go on and hit escape. And so what I want to do next is take these pieces and put them over here. The two ways I could do that, again, would be through insert, or I could use the copy, move, and rotate tools as well. So if I just wanted to insert the batteries in, I could go insert, battery, and now it's just asking where do I want to put this battery. And again, we don't need to be exactly on the money here. We just need to kind of put them around where they're located in this image. My other option I could do is I could take this battery here and I could either move it into place or I could even copy it into place. So if I take this one, I can highlight the whole thing. And then the move tool is up here, or keyboard shortcut M, or right click, and there's an option. The reason why I selected it first is because with the tools move, copy, and rotate, the first step is always to select your objects. So if you select the object beforehand, it just skips to the second step for you automatically. So I highlight the whole thing, right click, move. It's asking me to specify a base point, so that's where do I want to grab it by, and I'll just pick this corner, and now it's asking where do I want to put it. If I want to get real fancy and keep everything nice and tidy, if I hover over that snap point without clicking, I can track to it. So that means when I place my second battery, I can just have it so that these two are sitting in line with each other. It did unfortunately put my battery behind the picture. So I'm going to try, what I did was I tried regen to move it in front, which just unfortunately moved both of them behind it. So then what I'm going to do is just click on the image, right click, draw order, send to back, and then regen, R-E-G-E-N, and that fixed my problem. That might not be a problem you run into, but in this case it just was a little bit of a bummer, but it was an easy fix. Same thing for my PV panel to put it over here, but these are kind of laying horizontally, or this is laying horizontally, and I want it to be vertical. So again, one quick fix would just be to highlight this whole piece, right click, and then rotate, or the button up here, or keyboard shortcut RO. And again, just highlighting it beforehand just skips that first step and brings us to the step of specifying our base point. So I'm just going to click somewhere to grab it by. The base point in a rotate is where it's spinning around. So you can think of it as this is your finger holding a piece of paper down. So if I click here, it's then just going to spin around that point, and I'm just going to wait till I get that polar tracking that it's vertical, and then click again. So now this piece is vertical, and then I can copy it over to here in my schematic. So again, I'm going to highlight the whole piece, and then copy is up here, or keyboard shortcut CO. So I'm just going to right click, copy. For my base point, again, that's just asking where do I want to grab it by. So I'll just pick on any one of these corners, click to grab it, and then I'm just going to click to kind of eyeball it into place. And if I want these to sit in line, I can hover over without clicking, and I can track to where it's going to sit and be kind of close by. So now I have my panels and my battery in place. My next step would be I need to, and I'm just holding my scroll wheel down to pan. Sometimes when you pan, the image does disappear, but that's okay. It comes back once you release the scroll wheel. My next step is I need to make this charge controller and my inverter and my fuse box. There are no components in there for them, so we're going to need to make them, and I'm going to choose to make it through the polyline tool. So in my components layer, which I was in already, I'm just going to go into polyline, which is up here, or keyboard shortcut PL, enter, and I'm just going to draw a box around this. I'm not measuring anything, I'm just drawing around. For the length of this one, again, if I hover over without clicking and I get that little crosshair, I can make it so that these two are going to meet, and then I'll click again to end it, and I'll hit escape, and I'll explain why I chose to do that with a polyline instead of a rectangle. So we can see here that this has line weight to it. That line is kind of bold. If I use the rectangle tool, which is over here, or keyboard shortcut REC, and I just go rectangle, and I make a rectangle over this inverter, we can see that that doesn't have any weight to it. And that has to do with a special feature that the polyline tool holds. So I'm just going to click on that inverter box I made and just hit the delete key on my keyboard to get rid of it. So there's a special setting that was preset in this particular template that allowed that line to be bold. So if I go into the polyline tool, again, up here, or keyboard shortcut PL, and I just click to start my polyline. We can see down in here these little gray options, those are all different kind of settings or features. And what has been set for you automatically, so you do not have to do this, is our width. So we already have a width of a 1/2 inch, which is giving it that boldness. If I change that width to 2, enter, and then my ending width, I'll make like 0.75, enter, we can even see then that this line is kind of tapering in our polyline because it's going to be starting at 2 and then going down into that 0.75. So that's one thing we can do with polylines that we can't do with others, is we can kind of have them have this precedent of boldness within them. I'm just going to go back into my polyline tool. So I did PL, enter. I'll click to start it, and then I'm going to go into my width, and I'm going to set my starting width back to 0.5 and my ending width back to 0.5. And by the way, too, in here, all of those little blue letters, those are just the keyboard shortcuts to go into them. So another thing with a polyline is that I can switch over to an arc by typing A, enter, and then I can just start drawing lines that have curves as well as lines that are straight. So I'll hit escape to end the command. So just some other little things that we can do. But to get back to what we need to be doing here, I'm just going to use polyline again to draw a box around my inverter, my fuse box, and then also some of my connections. So PL, enter, or this button here. I'm going to click to start it, and I'm just going to trace around this box, hover over that point to track it, so that way I'll get this nice and straight, and then escape to end the command. Another shortcut too is that if you just hit enter, AutoCAD is going to bring you back into the last command you ever used. So since the last command I used was polyline, if I hit enter, we can see in my command bar, it just brought me right back into this tool. So I didn't have to come back up here, or I didn't have to type in a shortcut. Again, if I wanted to keep these tracked to each other where I start this fuse box, I could hover over and get those crosshairs, and then I can just click to where I want it to start, hover over, crosshairs. This is not a requirement, it's just one way I can tidy my drawing up. Escape to end the tool. I'll go back into polyline, which is PL, or the button up here, and I'll do another box. I can also just use the command C, enter, while I'm in the polyline tool to close that up. And instead of drawing another one here for my positive connection, I'm just going to use copy. So I just highlighted that whole box, right click, copy, click somewhere to grab it by, click to place it, and then I'll hit escape. So that was a couple of ways I could go about doing this. And my next step would be to make all of my different connections on my drawing. So I'm going to switch my layer over to this electrical red just to do some of my positive wire connections. And I'm going to go back into the polyline tool up here, or keyboard shortcut PL. And I'm just going to start it here, but I'm going to run into some issues with the fact that if I'm starting my cursor here, if that green box is popping up, it's going to want to snap to that corner. And I don't want it to snap to that corner. So I'll hit escape. What I need to do when I'm in the polyline tool is hover over until I get those crosshairs, because then I can start it off to the side. And I'm going to just trace out approximately where these are going, and then click where that intersection is, and I'll hit escape. And I'll do another positive connection from, and I can even hover over the midpoint to track, start it. And I know I went a little bit further for this one, but that's just because my battery was already skewed a little bit to the left. I'll do another polyline, PL, enter. Click off to the side, so I just tracked from the midpoint up. I'll track here, just to keep it a little bit more organized. I'll go down, and then I'll go track to the midpoint, click, click, escape to end. And then I'm going to switch myself over to the blue, the electrical blue, and I'll do my negatives. I believe those are negatives, right? Yeah. Sometimes I get them mixed up. So I'll do PL, enter. I'll track so that way I can just start it off a bit. Escape to end it. Back into the tool, up here, keyboard shortcut PL, or since it was the last command I used, I can just hit enter to go back into it. This time I'll do this one, so I'm just starting from the middle, up, over, and then down, just leaving some room for my other connection going to the charge control. So I'll go back into the polyline command, PL, enter, hover over the endpoint so I get that little crosshair to track, click to start it, tracing it over, and then just up to where it intersects, escape to end it. And I know I still need to do these, but these ones we're going to do with just plain lines, so that way they're not going to have the weight. And then lastly, we'll do the E white, the electrical white for these black connections where we're just chaining pieces. The color white prints out in black. So we just need to keep that in mind whenever we are seeing something in a drawing that we're trying to mimic or recreate. If it's black on the page, it's going to be white on AutoCAD. So I'm going to go into E white, PL, enter, track so that way I can make that connection start, over, click, click. So there are no measurements necessarily for that. I'm just kind of eyeballing it. With here, I can even just go from midpoint to midpoint. So I'm going to start the polyline tool, PL, enter, and I'll just go from that midpoint straight up, track to that midpoint, so I'm just hovering without clicking, click, click, and then I'll hit escape to end it. And then I'll make my connections here, but with these ones, I'm just going to use the regular line tool so they don't have that line weight or that thickness. So I'll switch myself back over to my electronics blue, and this time I'm just going to use regular line, hover over, move my cursor down, and click to start it. And then I'll just eyeball that, escape to end the command, back to the line tool, which is keyboard shortcut L, or this button here, or again, if I just hit enter, AutoCAD will bring me into the last command I used. I'll hover over this till I get a crosshair and just track up to it, hit escape to end, and then I'm going to switch my layer over to the red one. But let's say I forget to switch my layer, so I just go back into line, and I hover, and I click, and I place, and I realize, oh no, that was supposed to be in a different layer. Once I end the command, I can just hit escape, and I can click on this line, and I can switch its layer here in my properties bar, but I personally like to switch up here instead, purely because this gives me that little visual cue of the color that the layer's in. So now I can just switch it to the red one. And now I'll just switch over to the red beforehand. So if you forget to switch your layer, you can just go and fix it. So I'll go back into the line tool up here, or keyboard shortcut L, hover, move down to click, And then I can click to place these lines and make connections. And so at this point, I have my schematic ready to go, except I just need to add some text boxes so that way whoever is laying the system out can make sure that they know what these are. So to add those in, I'm going to switch my layer over to the the annotative layer. This is going to be my text layer. And then I'm going to use the text tool, which is keyboard shortcut T, or this button right here. I always use a multi-line text. If I click on this little arrow underneath, there is single line, never use it. I always use multi-line, which is what it is by default. So I'm just going to click on this option, and I'm going to make a text box from this corner to this corner. So that's my step one. Then I'm going to type in that this is the charge. I'll put in enter to go to the next line. Controller. And I dislike how it's crammed up in the top corner. So then I'm just going to change the justification by clicking on that little down arrow and say that I want middle center. And that's just going to center it there. If it bugs you that the word controller is slightly going off this box, you can highlight the whole thing. And up here in the text, you can change the text size from being 3.5. If I get rid of that half, now it's 3 inches and it does fit. And then once I'm all done, I can either click on close or hit escape. If I hit escape, it's just going to prompt me, do you want to save those changes? And I'll say, I sure do. And now I have that text here. So I'm going to do the same thing down here with the DC to AC inverter. So again, text is up here, or keyboard shortcut T, enter. I'm going to make a box by just going from the top left to the bottom right. And then I'll type in DC to AC inverter. Let me make sure I'm spelling that right. It's right in front of me, so it would be embarrassing to misspell it. And then, again, I like to change the justification by changing that, by clicking on that little arrow, middle center. And then if I just even wanted to change only just the word inverter to a different size, I can change that up here. One thing you do want to be careful of, though, is just not completely erasing that and then doing 3. In this case, it is working because I already have text up there that's 3 inches. But a lot of times it just tries to do it based on what was last put in there. So it looks like even then, though, 3 is still not enough. So I'll do 2.5. And I personally dislike how these are 2 different ones, so I'm just going to highlight the whole thing and change everything to 2.5. And then I'll close it. I'll put another text box here. So again, that's this button here, or keyboard shortcut T. From one corner to the other. You can change your justification beforehand. So I can change this to be middle center before I start. That's just a box. And then since that doesn't fit, I'll change it to 3 just because, again, I like when it fits nice and neat, but that is just kind of my big pet peeve or preference. And then I'm going to put some connection notes here, but these I'll do in a different color. So I'll do a property override for that. So I'm going to go back into text, one corner to the other. My justification will be the middle, and I'm just going to make it a negative. But because it's going to be in the annotative layer, but I want it to be the dark blue, I can just come up here and do an override. So I don't want to change its layer, but I do just want to change the color to be blue, which I need to highlight it first. Or I could change it beforehand. Maybe it would help if I actually clicked on blue. Or I could also click on it afterwards and I can change its color. I can do an override in here if I wanted to. And so for my positive, one last text box, I'll say text from here to here. My justification will be middle center, and I'll just type in a positive, and I'll highlight it and change its layer or change its color to red. So it's still in the annotative layer, but it's red. And then I can click outside of it, click on end or close text editor, click escape, all of those would end it. So at this point, I have my PV schematic set up. I just want to hide this picture. So if I click on the picture itself, we can see here that it's in the layer called image. And if I want to make that go away, what I'm going to do is freeze it. So if I freeze that layer, the picture goes away and no one's going to see that it was there in our kind of trace. But if someone needed to reference it at all, they can still bring it back through just clicking on that and then thawing it. And so now I have my schematic ready to go. I'm going to just double click on this text box here, and I'm just going to replace that with my own last name. Click outside of it to just end the tool, or if you double click on it, you can also click on close text editor when you're all done, or hit escape. And now we're ready for our next step, which is where we're going to print this out as a PDF picture. We're going to go back into the assignment instructions just to kind of look at what we're going to be printing out. So we're going to print it as a color PDF. We're going to use the print command, which is the word plot, because we call printing a different thing. So we can either type the word plot or we can use some of our buttons. For our option, we're going to use a PDF in our printer. And then for our plot table, we're going to use the regular one, which is called ACAD. For our paper size, we're going to use a regular sheet of letter paper, which is 8.5 by 11. For our plot area, we're going to do a window and just only have it show our actual schematic. And then for our scale, we're not going to print this to any particular scale. We're just going to say, put it as large as possible on the paper, please. And then we'll center it on our paper. We're going to do portrait instead of landscape, and then we'll be able to save it as a PDF. So to go through those steps, in AutoCAD, the 3 different ways you can get to the printer are you can type in the command plot, enter, and this is just warning me that I have multiple files open. Or I can click on this little button here, or I can go into the red A and I can click on print down here. All of those are going to do the exact same thing. Most of the time I opt for this little button here. If this window pops up about a batch plot, you can just ignore it and say you only want to do a single sheet. And that's going to bring up our printer settings. So for your printer name, you might have different printer names in here than I do, because this is also based on printers that I currently have access to. For PDFs, I almost always go with this one here, the DWG to PDF printer. So I'm going to click on that one for my printer name. For my paper size, I'm going to leave it set alone as this ANSI A. For my what to plot, display means that it's going to just print whatever is currently visible on my screen. If I click on that, I can also have it do the extents of my entire drawing, the limits that I set to a drawing space, or in this case, we're going to do the window. So if I click on window, it's going to ask me to just draw from one corner to another, and then that's going to window around my drawing that it's going to get printed out. If I don't draw the window correctly, I can just click on this option here and I can redraw it. So if I accidentally just only click and I only get a little bit, I can go back into window and I can reset what's going to be on that window. So I'm just going to draw a box around everything. For my plot offset, I want to check off to center it, and we'll be able to see here that the drawing is going to just switch, and it just moved it down to center it. For the scale, I'm going to leave it set as fit to paper, but this is where if I wanted something printed at 1/4 inch equals a foot or 1/4 from model space, I can play around with that, but I'm just going to leave it set as fit. Our plot table, we're going to leave as the default ACAD one, because that will print it in color, but this is where we can also set something to print in grayscale or only black and white. And we can also load in custom ones to do different plot styles in there. And then our last setting we want to play around with is we're going to put it in portrait. So we can see here when I clicked on that, the way that my orientation of my page changed, and also then my drawing is going to be able to be a lot larger because now it's going to kind of fit better to this size. If you want to preview it beforehand, you can just click on preview, and that'll show you kind of what your drawing is going to look like when we print it. And that's what I mean here where I said white lines are going to print black, and then you can hit escape to get out of the preview. When you click OK, it's not going to actually physically print anything out. Instead, it's going to prompt you for where you want to save this PDF file. You can save it anywhere. I always recommend saving things to like your desktop so that way you can find them later. And you are going to name it Tech1728 with your last name in all caps, your first name lowercase, and then -06 PV design. So again, you'll come here to your file name, Tech1728, last name in all caps, first name lowercase, -06 PV design. You do not need to type out that .pdf. That's going to be added automatically as the file extension. And this is going to save it to my desktop. You may want to save it to your flash drive or something like that. And then it even shows me just what my drawing looks like, how wonderful and beautiful. And then you can come onto As You Learn, and this is where you can upload your file submission. So that's just a kind of getting our feet wet with blocks. Next class, we're going to look at blocks a bit more, especially how we can download them and play around with them. But it just kind of gave us a little bit of a refresher when it comes to some of our polyline and line tools, as well as then we learned how to do some blocks and how to play around with the text tool and dip our toe into printing. If you have any questions, let me know, and I'll see you guys in the next one.